What's up guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of Bonsai-U. This time around we're going to be working on building a Tokonoma or display alcove. All right, so I thought for this episode we change it up a little bit and actually build something out where we display bonsai. It's something traditionally in Japan called a Tokonoma, which basically translates to an alcove. You'll see an alcove like this in most people's homes. There'll be a separate room set aside called a washitsu, which is a Japanese style room with a Tokonoma or alcove built into the room. Quite often you'll see ikebana or nice scrolls or sometimes even bonsai displayed in those Tokonoma. Well, what I want to do here at Eisei-en is build out a really nice Tokonoma so that as we complete our bonsai projects, we can start putting them on display here. As a matter of fact, you've seen me say at the end of some of our videos that we've already put out, let's put the tree in the Tokonoma. Well, that's been this area right here behind me, or where I'm sitting right now, where I've been displaying those trees, but it doesn't really have a completed feel to it yet. So what I want to do for this video is take you through the steps of how to complete a Tokonoma like this, and we're going to talk a little bit about semi-formal, formal, and informal Tokonomas, and I'll tell you kind of how I plan on building this guy out right here. All right, so for starters, let's talk about what we have built here right now. Now you can see off to the side here, actually on both sides, we've got shelves full of pots. I actually built these shelves myself and built this Tokonoma, or at least the start of the Tokonoma here in the middle myself. And what I wanted to do was build this out of really strong plywood because I knew we were going to be putting some heavy trees on here. And I wanted to make sure that the length and the depth of this were big enough to put large bonsai in. Because as you guys have seen in some of our videos, we have some pretty big honking trees here at Eisei-en. So I wasn't really concerned about making this the actual dimensions of what you would see a traditional Tokonoma in Japan because we have such large trees here at Eisei-en. So this thing is 36 inches deep, 3 feet deep by almost 10 feet wide. So it's significantly larger than you would see for most Tokonomas in Japan. Now, what I want to do today is build this out in what's called a sort of semi-formal style Tokonoma. Now, if you're really interested in diving deep into the differences between formal, semi-formal, and informal, you can check out the link in the description down below for my online advanced course with Bonsai Empire, where we dive deep into those elements of display. We also talk about how to choose stands for your trees as well, so definitely check that out. But for the purposes of this video, we're just going to be talking about how to build a really nice Tokonoma like this, and we're actually going to be building this in essentially a semi-formal style. And what that means is we're not using any lacquerware in terms of the framing, the wood framing that we're going to be building around this. So if it were a very formal Tokonoma, it'd be very dark lacquerware. If it were a completely informal Tokonoma, we'd be using very natural wood. Quite often the actual posts or beams on either side of the Tokonoma would be simple tree trunks, very natural tree trunks. But I'm not going to be doing that here either. We're going to be doing something basically right down the middle. We're going to be using kind of natural wood. I'm not going to stain it, but it's going to be nice planed wood, knotless clear wood. And as a matter of fact, we're going to be using something called red oak. So I picked this up at a local home store not far from here. It's actually Lowe's, for those of you who live in the States and are familiar with Lowe's. Now they're quite expensive, but when we're building out a Tokonoma like this, I want to use really good material for the framing. It really creates a beautiful picture frame for displaying the bonsai, which is why I went in with the extra cost for that good red oak wood. So we're going to be putting a beam across the front here to hide the 2x4 that I've got here for support. We're also going to be covering the two beams on either end with nice wide 1x6 inch or 15 centimeter wide red oak to cover those beams as well. And then we're going to be throwing some drywall up on the top, dropping it down, and some drywall on the sides so we can create basically a concise kind of insulated display right here inside of the Tokonoma. So first things first, what we're going to be doing is putting the drywall on either side here so that you don't see the pots through the end of the Tokonoma. It's very distracting when you're looking at trees on display here. So that's going to be the very first thing that we do. I'm going to hop over to the van, we're going to pull that drywall out and get it installed on either side first. Okay, so we've got standard drywall here. This is 4 feet wide by 8 feet tall. Now this area right here is actually, like I said, 3 feet deep, but it's 8 feet tall. So when I install this here, it's going to be sticking out beyond the end or the outside here of the Tokonoma by about a foot, but that's not really that big a deal. It's going to be a lot easier to install this and then go back through and actually cut it using the side of the beam here as the guide for the knife. So I'm going to throw this up on here. We'll see what this looks like to start with. All right, so it fits perfectly like I was expecting it to. Now the issue is up in the top corner there, we actually have some framing that was put in by the guys who installed the roof here. They put that up there sort of as like it's kind of like a crown molding, but very simplistic version of it, but it's sticking out about a 1/2 inch, which means that I can't get this thing pushed back against the back wall flush. So I'm gonna go up in the top corner and actually cut out a notch there so I can get this thing shoved all the way back in. Now once I get that actually pushed back flush against the back wall, what I'll do next is actually come through and attach this right here, this drywall, to the beam from the side. Now the cool thing is we're going to be doing some framing over the top of all of the screws, so I'm not going to have to go back through and spackle over each of the screws, which means I don't really have to necessarily be using drywall screws. I'm actually going to be using the deck screws that I have here. So before I get a whole bunch of hate comments down below, no, that's why I'm using decking screws on this. It's because it's what I had, and I think it's going to hold just fine in this particular instance here. But let's get that cut out first. We'll push it flush, and then I'm going to screw this thing to the beam here on the side. Okay, now that we've got the drywall installed on both sides, what I'm going to do next is actually paint both sides of the drywall here. We're going to paint it the same color as the drywall is painted against the back. That was painted when it was installed about a year ago, so I've kept the same paint here, and we're going to be painting these exactly the same color. Now you might be asking yourselves, well, why haven't you actually finished taping the corners of the drywall here, spackling over that, making sure all that looks good and dry before you put the paint on? Well, that's because I'm not going to worry about spackling the corners or taping the corners, because we're going to be covering, again, each of those corners with some trim. So none of that's going to be visible anyway. So I'm not really concerned about making sure that it's taped and spackled. You're not going to see it when we're done. So I'm going to get this painted up here next, and then we're going to start framing this thing out with that nice red oak. So now that we got the drywall attached and painted, while it's drying, what I want to do next is attach the front side or the facade side to the upright beams, the vertical beams that we're putting on the front here. Now, when we put these on, I want to make sure that we don't actually see any screws or nails from the front side. I want it to be nice and clear, very clean, very simple. So in order to do that, we're going to be attaching them from the back side with these L brackets right here. So I'm going to have to make sure I get everything lined up just right so that these don't stick out from the side, but when everything's said and done, it should have a nice, simple, clean look to it. Okay, so now that the paint on the drywall has dried, I'm going to start trimming the entire Tokonoma out. So the first piece that we're going to be putting on here is actually going to be another facade piece here running horizontally along the front side of the Tokonoma. Now again, I'm putting on a 1x6 inch piece of red oak right here. That's going to cover up this 2x4 that I've got right here. That's just adding support essentially for the weight of the trees when we actually put them in the Tokonoma. So I don't want to be able to see this from the front side, so we're going to be putting that nice big wide piece of red oak right in front here. So again, I'm going to try to hide the actual connection points where I actually attach this to the Tokonoma, because I don't want you to see any of that hardware. So it's going to be a little bit tricky here, but let's get this piece installed next. Okay, so the next piece that we're going to be putting on is another horizontal beam across the front here. Now, I mentioned earlier in this tutorial, we were going to be dropping a piece of drywall down from the ceiling on the front side of the Tokonoma here about 2 feet. The reason that we're going to be dropping that down is so that we can hide the lights up behind that to shine on the bonsai once we start displaying them. And also it helps hide the connection point when we hang up a scroll, for example, against the backdrop there. So I know that it's going to be dropped down 2 feet, so I know that that horizontal beam needs to be right at about that 2 foot mark so we can cover up that bottom seam essentially of the drywall. So let's measure that out. I'm going to measure up 6 feet from the bottom, 2 feet down from the top, make sure everything is lined up, and then we're going to put that horizontal beam on next. All right, so now that we've got all of the wood attached to the facade of the Tokonoma, we can work on the upper section with the new piece of drywall here. So as I mentioned earlier in the tutorial, the Tokonoma is just shy of 10 feet wide. So I picked up a 10-foot long piece of drywall here. This is 10 feet by 4 feet. So we're essentially going to be ripping this right down the middle, cutting it in half, taking a little bit of the length off of one end just to make sure that it fits up there. Then I'm going to lift it up there. We're going to see if it actually fits. If it does, I'm going to take it back off and then we'll paint it at that point. While it's drying, we'll start working on some of the other trim in the Tokonoma. But first things first, let's get this thing cut and put up there to see if it fits properly. Okay, so while the paint on the drywall is drying, we're gonna finish trimming out the Tokonoma. So for all of the trim inside of the Tokonoma, we're gonna be using 2x1s. These are also all red oak. So I've cut these two to size. This is gonna fit in the bottom right corner here, and we've got one more for the bottom left corner on the other side. What I'm gonna do is actually attach these down to the bottom here. And in this case, I'm actually gonna come in from the top with a screw down into the actual plywood to hold it in place. The reason I can do that is because we're gonna be putting another 2x1 piece of trim on top of this, so you're not actually going to see any of those screws once we get it all set up. But let's get these guys in there first. That'll also lock the bottom of this piece of drywall into place and keep it from looking so wonky. So let's do that next. So now that we essentially have the Tokonoma done, there's only one step left in building this thing, and that is to install some lights up underneath or behind that front panel that we just installed. So I'm gonna use something that's about 2800 to 3000 K, so it's gonna give us kind of a soft white, almost kind of orangey yellowish type light. I don't want it to be too bright. I think using something like a 4000 K or 5000 K shop light is gonna look a little too white, a little too bright. So I want something that's gonna have kind of a soft color to it and really create a nice atmosphere in the Tokonoma. So we're gonna be installing these lights here. Like I said, they're about 2800 to 3000 K. You can pick these up at basically any Lowe's or Home Depot. These are LED as well, so they should last a very long time. So I'm gonna go back up underneath the backside there, and we're gonna install 2 of these up behind that front panel. So before we install the lights here, I wanted to show you what I did behind this front panel here. You can see we've got 2 vertical boards here. These are actually support boards that are helping hold up this horizontal beam right here. This thing will likely sag over time if we didn't have these vertical boards providing support. So I've thrown those in there, and they also help hold in the drywall a little bit. So now that you've seen the back of this, let's install those lights up on the ceiling here. And now, the moment of truth. All right, I think it turned out pretty good. What do you guys think? Now, of course, it doesn't look like a complete Tokonoma quite yet because there's nothing on display in it. So at the end of this video, stick around because I'm gonna set up a bonsai on a stand with an accent next to it so you can see what a completed display looks like in the brand new Tokonoma. I wanna thank you guys so much for checking out this episode of Bonsai-U. Make sure to like and subscribe down below. Leave a comment about the Tokonoma. Let me know what you guys think. And if you really wanna support Bonsai-U going forward, you can click on the link in the description down below. It'll take you over to our website and you can make a monetary donation to help keep Bonsai-U alive going into the future. Once again, thank you guys so much for checking out this episode, and we'll see you in the next episode of Bonsai-U. Take care.